a first for everything, and this is going to be the first time that I preach here in the morning. So I'm excited, a little bit nervous, but excited more. Um, so for those who don't know who I am, my name is Sebastian. I've been here for most of my life, and I've been given this opportunity to speak today, which I'm super grateful for. I'm going to put this to the side. Don't need that here. And I've been given this opportunity to preach. Carrie is out of town, and he had asked me, he's like, hey, do you want to preach on any of the Sunday mornings? He didn't give me an option for the evenings nor on the Wednesdays. He said, pick a Sunday morning. And so I chose this one. And I'm glad, though, because I've been wanting to. I just had always been kind of hesitant because I didn't know if I'd be ready to speak to all of you. But y'all are my family, so it makes it feel a little bit easier. So I appreciate Andy for giving that prayer because it is usually my goal whenever I'm preaching to try to find something that everyone can relate to. A lot of us are at different points of our lives, and it's sometimes difficult to find something that will hit everyone. So that's why whenever I'm creating my lessons, I try to keep everyone in mind, try to come up with something that that we can all relate to and we can take into our lives and we can benefit from. And as Christians, I feel like one of the most comforting things, which was also mentioned in the prayer, is the idea that we know that we are saved because Jesus died on the cross for our sins. And we understand that, and we're so thankful for that. And we know that we have been saved through that. And we have the opportunity to be with God one day in heaven because of that sacrifice that Jesus did on the cross. But I feel like in order for us to fully understand this, for us to fully appreciate this, we need to also recognize why Christ went on that cross to die and why he did that for us. Today, I kind of just want to go over 3 different areas and see how they come all together to form, to give the reason why Christ had died on that cross and show the love that Christ had for us on that cross. So I want to begin with asking who we are. And that might kind of seem like an odd question because we kind of all know who we are, but in reality, we all have our own lives, like I mentioned, and we all know our own struggles, and we all know what we're dealing with, you know? And it's very important for us to constantly be reflecting on ourselves and constantly understanding who we are ourselves. We need to be reflecting on our lives as Christians and our lives outside of these walls, outside of this building, and making sure that we understand who we are outside of this. Whenever we're partaking of the Lord's Supper, one of the things we always read is we need to examine ourselves before we partake of the Lord's Supper. If we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, I'm just going to turn there real quick. That way we can go ahead and see this. In 1 Corinthians, and this is usually the verse that we always read right before the Lord's Supper, but it's important for us to understand that there is a step, before the Lord's Supper that we need to do. And starting in verse 27, it says, therefore, whoever eats of this bread and drinks of this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and of the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. We see in this first example that it is important before we even participate and do have the remembrance of the body and of the blood, we need to examine ourselves first. We need to examine whether or not we are living a Christian life, if we are living the life that we should be. And whenever we do that, we often find ourselves realizing that we aren't perfect. And we all understand that we all have our own struggles, we all have our own sins, and that there's not really anything that we can do to fix ourselves. That's a very important part of partaking of the Lord's Supper every Sunday, or basically every part of our life, is constantly remembering that we aren't perfect and that we cannot fix any of the own struggles that we have or fix any of the mistakes that we have by ourselves. I will be the first to say that whenever I reflect on my life, there are things that I have had issues with, that I have struggles, that I have had mistakes, and it just brings me back to that point that we aren't perfect. And we as humans, it's in our nature to make mistakes. We are always going to be making mistakes, and the thing is that um, we need to be understanding of this. It's not wrong. Well, it is wrong for us to make the mistakes, but it's going to happen, and it explains it here in the Bible as well. In Romans 3:23, it also mentions that we all have sinned. We all fall short of the glory of God. So all of us are sinners, and all of us really don't deserve the grace and the love that God has for us, and we fall short of it. But we understand that's just who we are, that we aren't worthy of this love that God gives us. And like I mentioned, there's three things that I want to mention, study today. And in understanding the sacrifice that Christ did on that cross for us, this part is very crucial in understanding that sacrifice, that we aren't worthy of it, that we don't deserve it at all. And but the thing is, as humans, I feel like a lot of us tend to be oblivious of our own struggles, of our own imperfections. And the Bible has listed many times in the Bible that we see people being oblivious to their sins and not really wanting to accept who they are. But we know what is acceptable to God, and we know whenever we're not doing it, because God clearly lays out inside of the Bible what he demands, what he accepts, and what he doesn't. And so with this Bible that he's given, the word that he's given us and the knowledge that he's given us, there is for no reason for us to not understand whenever we are wrong. Now, I'm not saying that this is for everyone, but I feel like a common struggle that we all deal with is conformity. A lot of the times we leave this building, and instead of going out and shining the love that God has for us and shining Christ out into the world, we're covering it up, and we're trying to fit into this world. And so many people are afraid of this idea of being different, especially with the time that we live in right now. And it's been getting worse and worse over time, where people don't want to offend other people. People don't want to be seen as different. They want to be seen as accepting to everything. They want to be able to fit into this world that is being created. And God knew that this was going to happen. God knew that we were going to have this struggle of going out and conforming to this world, as he states in Romans 12:2, that he wants us to not go out into this world and be conformed to the ways that it is, be conformed to the idea of fitting in and basically hiding who we really are. And I feel like I said that's a common struggle that we have as Christians, as going out into the world and not really accepting who we are and accepting the role as Christians that we should be accepting out into our lives. And like I said, we are far from perfect, and we make many mistakes, but we need to also understand what kind of effect that has to God. It's like being consistently disrespectful, being consistently disobedient to his face. And this kind of disrespectfulness and this kind of attitude towards God really doesn't merit any kind of love. And if we look at it in our own lives, if somebody was treating you like that, where they consistently do the opposite of what you tell them to do, if they consistently are always making mistakes, and you begin to lose trust in this person, you begin to lose faith in this person, and you understand that this person is just always making mistakes and is always hurting you. Why would you want to keep someone like that close to you? But we, like I said, this is the type of people that we are. And whether or not, whether we're Christians and we've already partaken of the sacrifice of Christ, or whether we're not Christians, all of us need to understand that we are all sinners, and that we all fall short of that glory, and that we make mistakes, and that we, in the end, deserve punishment. We deserve, the worst that can happen to us, because our Creator, our God who gave us all of this, is being constantly slapped across the face from our actions. And this realization, this understanding of our actions, like I said, is very important for us to understand how we should react to that. A lot of the times we know that we're struggling, we know that we're sinning, and we understand that, but we don't respond in the correct way. Um, whenever I was young and I was at home, and whenever I did something wrong, I immediately felt this immediate regret or pain because I know that I just was disobedient to my mom or disobedient to my dad. And what I would do is I would get really sad. I would make this letter. I would slide it underneath their door, and it was just my apology. It was my sincere apology to whatever I did wrong. And in today's life, whenever we're out in our whenever we come to services and we're here reflecting on our lives, we should have the same mentality where we think about all of the sins that we have, and that it just breaks us down. It just cuts us to the heart in the fact that we are doing this to God. And we need to have that humbleness, and we need to have that want for forgiveness, that need for forgiveness. And a story that I really like to whenever I think about this topic is in Luke chapter 15. If we go to Luke chapter 15, give me one second. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 17. I love this parable because it correlates a lot to what I'm saying right now. But when we go to verse 17, it says, "But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have enough bread and to spare, and I perish with hunger?'" This is where we're hearing the story of the prodigal son when he goes off and he decides to disobey his father and take all of his money and live the way that he wanted to live. And what we all know the story where he ends up in the worst part of his life, where he's eating the food of pigs, and he ends up with nothing. And he's left to this point where in verse 17 it says, well, when he came to himself, when he understood, when he reflected on his life, and when he started to realize what he did and where he's at right now, he began to realize what he needed to do. And so when he came, it says in verse 18, he says, "I will rise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" That's the point that I want to get to, that we need to come with that kind of mentality, that we understand we've sinned against God, and that we need his forgiveness, and that we want to be put on the lowest of the low because that's what we feel like we deserve. And that's the mentality that we need to have whenever we're reflecting on our lives, whenever we're thinking about what we've done, because any kind of sin, any kind of disobedience to God really does not deserve any kind of mercy or grace, because of the constant love that he keeps giving us, and the constant sinning that we keep doing and disobeying him. But this leads me to my next topic, which we need to understand who God is, and who Jesus was, and when he died on that cross, and what kind of love that they had. So whenever we look at God throughout the Bible, we see all of the things that he does for us, but what I want to focus on is the times that he has shown his love. And we all know that God himself is love. Anything that he does is love for us. And the great thing about that, and it's a very sobering thought, is that God cannot change. He cannot just switch however he feels on us. He's always going to be the same from then to now, and that is something that we are extremely grateful for, because we know that God is going to be wanting to give us that love. And in James chapter 1, verse 17, that's where we have that confirmation. We have that reassurance that God is always going to be the way he is. In the same way that he has mercy and he has grace and he has forgiveness, he's going to have that forever. It's never going to cease. It's never going to give up on us. And that is something that we can have faith in, that we can hold true to, because a lot of the times we feel like God is going to run out of the forgiveness that he has for us. He's going to run out of that patience with us. And that is something that we fear, because it's something human that we do. Like I mentioned, if you have someone with you that is constantly just disobeying you and just constantly hurting you and constantly just giving you pain, sometimes you feel like you give up on that forgiveness. Sometimes you just give up on that person, and you don't know how many times you can say sorry. And the thing with God is that there's no limit to how much he loves us, and that's always going to be the same, and it's never going to change. And continuing that, we also see that God gave us his son, and I really don't think that any of us can even understand what kind of sacrifice that is, to give up, your only son for the sins of your creation. And all of this that he has done, he did it through love. He offered his son to die on the cross for our sins, and with that sacrifice, we need to realize that Jesus just gave us the opportunity to cross that gap to God. Whenever we are living our lives, we understand that the sin that we do and the mistakes that we create build this gap between us and God. And that gap is because God cannot be anything that isn't holy. He cannot be anything that is unclean. And here in this world, we consistently keep putting dirt on our clothes and creating ourselves unholy and creating ourselves unclean with the mistakes and the sins that we do. And that gap right there is uncrossable because God cannot have that with him. But Jesus dying on that cross, Jesus giving us his life and that sacrifice, gives us that opportunity to make us new again, to take off all of that dirt, for us to be with him one day in heaven, for us to be clean so that we can be with him. And the only reason he did that is because he loved us so much so that we may have that opportunity. When we go back to the story of the prodigal son, we can see this in action as well. If we go back to Luke chapter 15, let me go ahead and go to verse 20. And it says, "And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great while off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and no longer worthy to be called your son.'" Verse 22, but it says, "But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us be merry.'" In verse 22, that's the part where I want to focus on, where we see that, the son, before he arrived, he was living with the pigs. He had probably torn up clothes. He had the worst attire he could have on, and he was filthy, and he understood that, he was coming back filthy. But what the father did was he immediately cleaned himself, took off all the dirty clothes, took off all of the imperfections of the son, and made him new again. And you see that he accepts him back into the household, clean and new again. And this is the same thing that participating in that death of Christ does for us. That we remove all of the sin, we remove all of the guilt off of our lives, so that we may be with God one day. And Jesus did that for us because he loved us. But the thing is that sometimes we feel like we don't deserve that. Sometimes we whenever we're reflecting on our lives and we're sitting there thinking about who we are and what we've done, we feel sometimes that we may also be too far away from God's love, and that we've created this distance that there's no way that I can possibly be reunited with God and reunited in his family. But what I like to go back to a lot of the times to give me this reassurance is the story of Paul. And you see the story of Paul back when he was persecuting the church and the Christians themselves. He was doing probably one of the worst things ever, which was directly persecuting people who believed in God. And all of this kind of harms to the church that he was doing, and even through that, God had grace for him. When we go back to the story in Acts 9, you see that God had a purpose for even him, even someone that was persecuting God's people. And someone like that, we feel like whenever we're thinking about whether or not we're worthy of this sacrifice, we're worthy of this love that God has for us, I like to go back to this and be reassured that God, no matter what we've done, no matter what past we have and who we were, wants us to be new again, wants us to be part of his family, and he's just waiting for us to go to him and accept it. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9, let me go ahead and turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9, Paul even understood himself, that we don't deserve this kind of grace. Verse 9, it says, "For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God." Verse 10, "But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain." I'm going to stop there. This is just something that I wanted to state, just to go ahead and clarify on the point on who God is and who he is. His grace is everlasting, and it's always there, even for the worst of us. And when we understand that God wants us to be in his family, and that's just who he is. He just has that love for us. Now, in the last point that I wanted to give, I just want to explain what has been done. First we realize who we are, what we've done in the past, and the sins that we've done, and we understand that we need to be humble and we need forgiveness. And then we see God, it's kind of like an addition. So we have us, we're sinners, and then God, which I just explained, is just loving and is full of compassion, never changing, wanting us to be in heaven with him as well. When we add those two things together, what we want to see, what has been the outcome. We want to see what happened. And in the end, God always had this ultimate plan for us to be saved. He wanted us to have the forgiveness and have this opportunity to be rescued from this world of sin, rescued from this life of sin, so that we may have the opportunity to be with him and not perish. There is nothing that we can do for ourselves, and Jesus dying on that cross, like I mentioned, is the only way that we could have ever crossed that gap. And he's the mediator, he's our reconciliator to Christ. But one of the things I also wanted to mention is that, we're reminded of this every Sunday. Every Sunday, whenever we partake of the Lord's Supper, we have this steps, and we have these like memories. And so, for instance, whenever we're partaking of the Lord's Supper, we first need to have that reflection on ourselves. We need to have that understanding of who we are. We partake of the Lord's Supper, which is us remembering Christ, remembering his love, remembering what he did for us by sacrificing himself on that cross. But after we partake of the Lord's Supper, we understand that in partaking of that, we've been saved, and that we've been renewed, and we have this opportunity to be with Christ. And like I mentioned, all of this is done every Sunday, and it isn't something that we need to only remember on the first day whenever we're baptized. I feel like a lot of the times we have this kind of mentality, and we have this strong effort in understanding who God is around the first times that we're baptized. When we're baptized, it's because we've understood who we are, and we've done the whole here, repent, we've confessed, and we believe who he is, and we get baptized. But this process of understanding who we are and understanding who God is and being appreciative of his sacrifice is a daily thing. It isn't something that we do at the beginning of our Christian lives. It isn't something that we only do on Sundays whenever we partake of the Lord's Supper. It's something that we do every single day of our lives. Whenever we wake up, we need to examine ourselves and see, am I living the life that Christ wanted us to live? Am I being the person that he wanted me to be? And a lot of the times, like I said, we're humans. We're not gonna be doing it the way that we need to be. I know myself, I find myself failing in a lot of the things that I need to be doing, and I don't know everyone else's lives, and like I said, that is why it's very important for each and every single one of us to examine our own lives. And this in itself will help us all to strengthen each other whenever we express our needs, whenever we express what is going on with each other. That way we can build on each other and create each other as stronger Christians. So that is just something that I kind of wanted to explain today. It's just been something on my mind as far as, understanding what has been given to us, and which is the ultimate prize, which is the opportunity to be with God in heaven. We've been saved that we don't have to perish away and live a life of eternal pain. After this life and after this life, through the sacrifice of Christ, we have this opportunity to live in glory. We have the opportunity to to live the life that God wants us to live. But it's only whenever we are constantly looking into ourselves and constantly working in ourselves and not just doing it, periodically and every once in a while. So I just felt like this would be something that everyone can benefit from, and we can take with ourselves outside of these walls. That way we may be able to work on ourselves and build ourselves up, and that in doing that, as mentioned in Timothy, will be seen by others, and it'll be helping other people as well. And the work that you do for yourself, the meditation, the reflecting, the building up of yourself is only going to be visible by other people, and in that yourself, you'll be helping other people realize that you are different, that you aren't fitting into this world, and they want to know why you're different. And so hopefully what I've said today has been any kind of refreshment, any kind of reminder of what we need to be doing daily. And I'm going to go ahead and give the opportunity right now. If you feel like you haven't been living that life, if you feel like you understand that you're full of sin and you haven't been baptized yet, and you understand that you want to be saved, and that you understand the only way for you to be saved is through baptism, and it is through joining in through the death of Christ, there's going to be a moment right now while BJ's singing for you to go ahead and come up, for you to make your prayers known and your needs known, and hopefully we can help you out with whatever you need help with. So as you can do that right now as BJ comes up and leads this song of invitation. You may be standing.